Hey y'all, coming to you from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Ben Kittelson, manager at Reftellus and GovLove co-host. We've got a great episode for you today. We're going to be talking management in Bowling Green. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. ELGL is a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government. Now you can follow GovLove on LinkedIn, so never miss an episode. And we're here at the 2024 ICMA Conference, International City County Management Association Conference in Pittsburgh, to talk to our guest today. So I'll introduce her. India Adams-Jacobs is the town manager of the town of Bowling Green, Virginia, a position she's been in since January 2024. Previously, she served as town manager in Colonial Beach, Virginia, assistant city manager in Delray Beach, Florida, and assistant to the city manager in Petersburg, Virginia. She's a former ICMA Local Government Management Fellow at Albemarle County, Virginia. That one's always a tough one to say. And then also in Tacoma, Washington. So, India, welcome to GovLove. Thank you so much for joining and talking with me.
Thank you for having me, Ben.
Yeah. So, we've got a tradition on the podcast to do a lightning round to get to know our guest a little bit. So, my first one for you, what book are you currently reading?
Well, I just wrapped up It Takes What It Takes. It's basically a book about mental conditioning. As a former student athlete, I played softball in college at George Mason University. Yeah. I really like books that focus on performance and really honing on being the best version of yourself, both personally and professionally. Yeah. It also had a foreword by Russell Wilson, who's one of my favorite NFL players and a native Virginian. So really highly recommend that if you haven't read it.
Yeah, cool. Very cool. I'll have to add that to the list. And since we're in Pittsburgh, do you have your highlight yet in the first couple of days here at the conference?
Definitely. Like I mentioned, as a former softball player, being at PNC Park for the opening event, my husband and I have a mission to visit every MLB park in the U.S. So unbeknownst to me, I didn't even realize when I registered that we would have a chance to check another one off, even though it wasn't for a game. Yeah. That was 8 out of 30 for us.
8 out of 30,
we managed to go to Boston, Miami, Philly, now Pittsburgh, but also Seattle and a couple of other cities. So excited to continue that journey alongside him.
Yeah. What's next on the list of the 30?
I'm thinking maybe Kansas City randomly, but I think that'll be out there.
I didn't go to a game, but I've toured I went into the gift shop at Kauffman Stadium.
Yeah. With a cool second stadium, maybe being Chicago.
Yeah, Chicago.
Being able to maybe hit two in a long weekend or long week.
There you go. Awesome. Well, that's cool. You got to knock one off the list. And all right, my next lightning question for you: cake or pie?
Pie.
Okay. Any particular?
Either sweet potato, pumpkin, or coconut.
Nice. I love it. And then, where do you go for inspiration?
I really like to travel.
Yeah.
So any opportunity to travel somewhere new, it might sound a little hokey, but love visiting new cities. Yeah. Always get inspiration by seeing what other cities are doing. It's kind of hard to turn your brain off as a local government nerd. Whether it's you're attending an event or looking at how they do parking, signage, just oddities. But definitely traveling. I'm looking forward to traveling and doing some more in the future.
Oh yeah. No, you go around being like, oh, I can see where the wastewater pipes or sewers are.
Stormwater management,
My wife is tired of me pointing out lift stations everywhere we go, which is like...
Even my son was like, oh, that's a manhole. And, I wouldn't anticipate most 4-year-olds, but, when your mommy's a manager, you learn those things.
That's awesome. All right, then what was your path to local government? I know I had read your intro a little bit and some of the places you've been, but, how'd you end up in the place you are today?
Yeah, so I think it really starts when I was an undergrad at George Mason University. I had an opportunity where most of my classmates were going the federal government route. I took a government course, fell in love after starting as an athletic training major with the hopes of going to dental school. Yeah. Took a government class.
It's a big shift.
It was a big shift that was taught by a former congressman and a sitting congressman. One was a Republican, one was a Democrat. And they kind of just took each class and kind of dissected things that were going on at a national level, but also really kind of drove home how these things matter at a practical level, on a state level and locally. And so that class really changed my course and my trajectory. From there, I reached out to my county administrator, who at the time was Percy Ashcraft in Virginia. He was my county administrator in Caroline County, which is my hometown, and he arranged for me to have an internship that summer. I was actually sharing a story earlier today where no 2 days were the same. Yeah. You could be doing anything from doing research on FOIA with State Library of Virginia to helping file a claim because a deer hit a sheriff's deputy car, right? And for some reason, that kind of resonated with me, having no 2 days being the same. Also realized that at that time, there weren't a lot of people in leadership that looked like me.
Yeah.
And I really thought deeply about what that meant about not having a seat at the table, and then potentially being someone who could ascend to those positions in leadership and really being able to help people at localities in any way possible. And so from there, I switched my degree to public administration, my major to public administration, and then I went on to Virginia Tech, majored in public administration, took an ICMA fellowship in Albemarle County, then had opportunity to go out to Washington. And so I was kind of the traditional path after that in city manager's office and where I am now.
Yeah. You've been kind of a bunch of places. Is there something? So obviously, that internship made a big difference. But maybe early in one of those first jobs that you're like, "Oh, I picked the right place, and I'm going to stick with this career."
Yeah, I'd highlight my time in Tacoma was really, I would say, life-changing. It was also the place where I met my husband, so life kind of took off from there. But on the professional front, I had an opportunity to work for T.C. Broadnax, who was a visionary strategic leader who really motivated his employees, and I was lucky enough to work right outside of his office and see kind of all of the inner workings of how a city runs. And I had one council member who was also kind of a visionary, and he wanted us to take a look at this anchor institutions concept. And so I was tasked with that project, and it went from very quickly doing research, coming up with a plan, how we could establish one in Tacoma. And this was in 2015, so we're almost a decade ago. And it was just a massive undertaking. And as a new graduate, right out of grad school, it's like, this is not what I thought I would be doing. But he was like, well, it aligns with economic development. You want to go work over here. And so it kind of gave me that pathway. After working on that project, I was able to fly out actually someone from an established anchor institution program, the Cleveland Greater University Circle Initiative, who also shared a name with me, India Pierce-Lee. And she came out and kind of told us how it worked in Cleveland, how to hire local, buy local, and kind of keep those dollars in your local community. And so the power of partnerships and collaboration and seeing how that touched everything from your eds and meds, who are your anchors in your community. And she really gave us the foundation of how to bring that in Tacoma. And within 2 years, it took quite a bit of time to kind of lift that program up, but we had every university in the city at the table. We had every hospital at the table. And that took a lot of effort, both from myself, but also other department heads, such as our strategic planning manager at the time, Tanisha Jumper, economic development director, Ricardo Noguera, and just really realizing that only really a city government could lead that kind of conversation and bring all of those partners together. And I think looking back a decade later, being able to work with partners and anchors such as military institutions, like I'm currently working in my current locality in my hometown, Fort Walker, somewhere where my grandmother worked as a cook on the base to support, the military almost 30 years ago for readiness. Just one little piece of how your local economy really is driven by these partners in your community. And now we just actually signed a partnership with the base to help them with their procurement. Cool. And so on the other side, as manager now, I'm leading still anchor initiatives just in another locality 3,000 miles away. But I think that was one project that definitely made me realize I was in the right place doing the right things.
That's awesome. That's a great story. It's cool to see over time, like, projects rhyme that you in different organizations.
Yeah, everything's scalable.
So you mentioned Bowling Green's your hometown. So what's it been like to come back to your hometown as the manager? Like, that's got to be quite the experience.
Building a great team and really leaving them in a good place. But the opportunity to serve in my hometown was not something I was willing to pass up. It's actually interesting. My town manager's office is in the same building, in the same town hall where my parents' wedding reception was.
That's so
cool. Just the kind of the bookends of this is where kind of things started, and here I am today. Also, one of our local faith-based organizations held an event for our community leaders, and I was invited and had the opportunity to sit right in the back of the pew, about 3 pews from where I remember getting up and being baptized as a child,
awesome.
Like 9 years old, where my 2 little ones, my 4-year-old and my 1-year-old, were playing with their highlights books, so just like I did when I was their age. So definitely some core moments and memories that I'm making in my current community, in my hometown, where I wouldn't get a chance to do anywhere else. So I'm blessed and grateful for that.
That's so cool. That's awesome. So we heard about Bowling Green, heard about coming over in as your hometown. So I'm curious, taking on a new role. You mentioned you were 9 months kind of in this job. Like, obviously you knew the community, so you had a head start. But what was it like getting into the organization? How'd you kind of approach that as manager of Bowling Green?
Yeah, so I think most of us in our profession, when you make a transition, you take some time, 30, 60, 90 days to assess kind of where things are organizationally. So I definitely took that time as a new manager, but I think I was dealt a unique hand in as much as I had one full-time admin person when I arrived. So I really didn't have much of a team to kind of assess or really start with. Beyond the folks that were already there in our public safety and our public works teams, which are great. So really had a unique opportunity to kind of build a team from scratch, which I think we've done. Hired a great director of community development and partnerships, who's helping already. We won a grant a couple weeks ago to help with some water infrastructure. Hired a great finance director, great admin executive assistant who also helps with event coordination, had background in hospitality and tourism, and then a great billing specialist. So being able to really build that core admin team, which is kind of the backbone of much of what we do in local government, but also supporting our public safety team, our police department, been able to actually hire a new part-time police officer, and a couple of folks in public works. So it's been really exciting.
That's awesome. That's very cool. So so you were able to hire some new folks on and get to know the organization. And I'm curious also, like, when you took the role, what was that kind of decision process like, knowing you're able to come back to your hometown and I'm just curious about that, choice.
So it was interesting. Actually, one of those opportunities that presented itself again, I really wasn't looking. Was very happy in my previous organization. That really afforded me the opportunity to become a CAO for the first time, and I think one of the youngest African-American females in the Commonwealth ever, at the time, at about 30 years old. And so one of the local business owners actually approached me when the vacancy was open when I was on maternity leave.
Oh, wow.
And they said, we need someone with a brain. And I said, well, I have that plus more. And so things progressed, and conversations worked itself out, and council ultimately selected me, and I take that, with a great badge of honor to be able to come back and help the community, lead through some opportunities, but also some challenges, but also some great opportunities as we look to move forward.
What are some of those challenges that you're excited to tackle or have been able to kind of get your hands around?
I think with most localities, and particularly small towns, deferred maintenance and infrastructure. So that's a big priority of myself and council. We had, I think, the first strategic planning session ever for the town this past January, and council very clearly laid out utilities, infrastructure, and finance, top three. And so I'm a very strategic person, and have been really focused on strategic planning most of my career, and tying capital budgets with operating budgets and strategic planning. So really just honing in on those things that we need to be focusing on day in and day out with my team, and focusing on the mission. In management, sometimes we can get distracted by the most recent Facebook post or whatever. So being able to just really focus in on those priorities, because we know those outcomes are what's going to be what moves the community forward. I also think we are a small town, just kind of perfectly positioned right between two major corridors. And we have some great economic development happening around us to the north, but also to the south. And where we are with position to the military base, but also strategically in Virginia, being kind of a pathway to Maryland. I think there's some opportunities for us from a tourism perspective that I look forward to leveraging. I also have some great business owners on our main street that have helped revitalize the town in a way that's very different than when I was there as a youth. So going through the pandemic, 2008, just really seeing how the town has been resilient on its own, but looking forward to help bring some of my expertise in economic development and connect with our state organizations and even organizations like Main Street to really drive home some of those principles and so that we can lead to those outcomes that we're looking for our community. Bettering our events, becoming really a place that people want to come and visit, and not just a place they drive by. So I think that's something I'm excited about.
I love that. That's awesome. So you mentioned the fort a couple of times. What's it like trying to work with an anchor institution like that, like the federal government? Like, how has that gone?
It's interesting. About 5 or 6 years ago, our state economic development association did some work and identified it as an opportunity that the town needed to to leverage and
Yeah.
work with as a strategic partner. So I think based on my experience everywhere I've worked, I've been lucky enough to work with the base. When I was in Tacoma, I helped at JBLM. When I worked for the city of Petersburg, it was Fort Lee. And now being home, being able to work with Fort Walker. So I really appreciate the opportunity to work with them and work together specifically. They want us to be able to help them, and we want to help them. We also want to leverage the assets that they have on their base that most people don't know are available. The base is a huge recreational opportunity for hunting, fishing, just recreation tourism in general. So one of the things that we'll be doing with some of our new website updates will be featuring the base as a location to go recreate. Whether you're fishing or hunting, whatever you want to do, you can go on the base and do that. And we're just 3 minutes away. So being able to say, if you want to daddy date with your son and you want to go fish on base, get on the app, go do that, come back into town, have some lunch, go on back. If you want to hunt, learn how to hunt. If you're outdoorsman, you can go on base and do that. So I think there's some opportunities to leverage that partnership with the base that I'm very excited about, but also for people to make memories that you wouldn't necessarily think you could on a military installation.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. No, that's fascinating. Was it like it was always open and a recreation opportunity, or was that something you had to work out with them to open up some of those lands?
I think it's always been available, but not necessarily marketed as such.
Or communicated.
So it is, and it is a National Guard base, so it's not a fully functioning base like some other, fully activated bases. But we definitely know that that's an opportunity that has been underutilized, and we look forward to marketing it a bit more so people can leverage it and make core memories.
Yeah, that's so cool. So you've been in different organizations in your career and across the country now. What's different maybe about a smaller, slightly more rural community like Bowling Green than like some of the other places you've worked?
Yeah, I think communities are different all over the place, but I think there's some commonalities. Most folks want the same things. They want great services for less. And we know as managers, sometimes the challenge is managing with less. And so I think that's one of the things in a smaller community, you don't have as many folks just to work on things that you would if you were in a big city. When you're in a 300,000 person population locality, you have pretty deep benches. You have people who are highly specialized in some areas. So I think that's one of the challenges with fewer resources. You often have to become more creative, more innovative.
Wear more hats.
And wear more hats. So like in my current position, I'm a town manager, zoning administrator, clerk, HR, social media. And so I think some of the things we've talked about here today and at the conference has been, leveraging AI. And I think for small localities, figuring out how you can leverage AI to fill in some of those gaps just that naturally you won't be able to fill because of resources, but also as we see recruitment become more difficult. And then, with the retirements that we see from the silver tsunami that we all learned about in grad school 15 years ago.
It's taken 15 years to get here.
It's here. And so thinking about ways to kind of fill those gaps is a challenge. But I think there's also great opportunity. One of the things that I think I learned in my previous locality, which was another small rural community, is the power of working with your partners. In that locality, we had like 120 nonprofits in a town of 4,000 people.
Oh my God.
And so it was high touch, high engagement. But they also had an extremely powerful, tight-knit community that would rise up to work on whatever kind of initiative that you needed. And if you could build that community buy-in. And so I think that's an opportunity, and I think it's a change from when you're in bigger localities. You have a budget. If you have an idea or a program you want to start, you pitch it to your manager. You may get some one-time funding to make it happen. That's not as realistic when you're working with budgets that
That's a good point.
are a lot smaller. And so the thing that you may want to do, you may have to find some volunteers to do it, or you have to leverage technology in a way to do it that maybe you would have done in that big city, scale it to make it fit. So I think that's something that's definitely different in smaller localities.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, you can't just go find some money for an idea anymore. You have to, well, and then you mentioned like you're an African American woman in this leadership role. What, like, especially in the South, that can be even more challenging. So, what's that kind of experience been like? Having stepped into this chair, being the person that you are. Like, I mean, how have you kind of managed through that, and what's that been like for you?
Well, I think in most localities. Um, I think you see some changes now in perception.
Yeah.
I think specifically age has been more of a challenge
Oh, interesting.
often
Yeah. Yeah.
than race, just because when you're younger coming up in this profession, even if they're right out of grad school, people are suspicious because they think you're the
Oh, yeah.
intern
Yeah.
right out of college, and you
Yes.
know
Yeah.
nothing, even though you spent
Yeah.
X amount of years learning this thing. So
Yeah.
I think navigating that, I think some of the changes and the challenges that come with that, just around people's own perceptions,
Yeah.
which maybe you have to work hard to not try to internalize. In fact, I think I had a conversation with one of my employees last week about, you may have gone and done these great things in school and education, but when you get in a public meeting with, whether it's your board or your commission, they still see you as
Yeah.
someone that's
Yeah.
their child's age.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you
Oh,
have to
man.
be more prepared. And unfortunately, sometimes you won't be seen as legitimate until you meet these proverbial, markers that were
Yeah.
there before:
Yeah.
marriage, kids. And, it's unfortunate, but I think that's still a reality that we live in. So I think just navigating that and focusing on the work, the best that you can, and then the outcomes.
Yeah.
I think once people realize that if you're a person that says you're going to do this and you can deliver on it,
Hmm.
I think that's kind of the best indicator of success. And at that point, your gender and your race becomes a moot point.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're successful, I think that kind of washes away most of those other things.
Yeah. If you can prove it and you can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a really good point. That's great. So one of the things, you're here at the conference to do a session from when you were at Colonial Beach. Can you talk a little bit about that program that you'll be talking about? I think I read it's called the Returnship, which is my favorite. That's really funny. Or I love that name.
Yeah.
What is that?
So yeah, the Returnship was an innovative internship program that kind of got born out of necessity.
Yeah.
At the end of 22, I found out that I was pregnant with my second child, and I was working in a locality that was severely understaffed,
Mm.
for as busy as they were, and going through like the largest redevelopment in 100 years.
Oh, wow.
And so that comes with a lot of challenges, from the come heres and the from heres, seeing different visions for what the town could be, but also with those developments and those changes require sometimes additional staffing to work on the projects that needed to be done. And then also working through the end of the pandemic, or middle to end of the pandemic, and finding ways to leverage those ARPA monies that we had in a strategic way.
Mhm.
So we really found ourselves in a circumstance where we were very successful. We also had won a lot of grant money.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think the final number was we basically doubled our organization's budget, through grants and direct allocations from the
Wow.
state. I strategically kind of worked through some legislative agendas with our council,
Yeah.
and thankful to our state senator who was able to help bring us almost $6 million additional dollars at
Oh
the
my
time.
gosh.
So between competitive grant funding that we were able to win and secure, ARPA money, and then direct allocations, basically a whole additional budget,
Wow.
in comparison to what we started with. So I was very proud as manager to be able to help leave the town in a much better fiscal position than when I arrived. But that meant we had a lot of work
Yeah. Yeah.
and a very thin staff to be able to do that with. So sat down with my HR director, who also served as my assistant town manager at the time, and said, we need to do something different.
Yeah. Yeah.
And quite frankly, being in a beach community where people were highly engaged, they like to volunteer. They often said, how can we help the town? And
Yeah.
we had no tangible way to do that. And so I pitched the idea and said, I think we should do this. We need to think about kind of a reverse internship program,
Oh,
kind of
interesting.
a
Yeah.
returnship,
Yeah.
so to
Yeah.
speak. And so around that same time, there were articles coming out about what the pandemic did
Mm.
to, the kind of the boomer generation and the folks that were just extremely isolated during the
Mhm.
pandemic. And so these kind of two different concepts came together about how can we help boost our organizational capacity,
Yeah.
fill our gaps, but also provide opportunities for these very capable, experienced, and skilled, mostly recent retirees to come back to
Interesting.
the
Yeah.
workforce in a
Yeah.
meaningful way. And so thought of this program, set up the structure that was housed out of the town manager's office with support from the HR director, really filled our gaps in parks and recreation. We had a contracted legal team at that time, and we were able to find a return who had previous legal experience.
Oh, cool.
He was able to help with some policies and procedures, and then he ended up helping with fleet management. So there were a couple gaps that we had that was filled there. We had a recent retiree who was 25 years with the police department, assisting the chief of police.
Yeah.
And we had some challenges with customer service and complaints with Public Works, and thought that her skill set for being able to triage calls that would come through the police department could definitely apply to answering calls and complaints in Public Works. So she helped with work order management system and supporting admin functions over there. Quite frankly, people loved having her back because she was a familiar face. And she would tell you that after about 5 or 6 weeks of being retired, that she wanted something else to do and to get out the house. And so, we found opportunities for these people within our organization. Of course, they applied, got vetted, and we just kind of crafted the roles for them as we went along. We had another gentleman who helped with IT. We did not have an IT department. Small locality, small budget, don't have a department. We had contracted services. He actually worked in IT in the military.
Oh, wow.
And so he helped come back, was our webmaster, helped with clear forms, getting our online business licenses processes online, helped with business licenses online and those processes and really streamlining things, and just general website maintenance and assistance in some cases with social media. So I think the program in of itself, which was initially supposed to be a pilot, is now in its second, going on third year. So I think it's really great to be able to really come up with an idea, execute it with my team, and to still have those original returns stay on board with the locality. Since then, I've been able to kind of work out a similar arrangement in Bowling Green. We've had one who has helped us with RFP for solid waste services, and then also help with a waterline project that we're currently working on. So
that's awesome. Yeah. That's so cool. So just not to get too in the weeds, but when you're setting up a program like that, is it, hey, we're going to, I guess logistically, we're just going to put something out for interns and then we're going to craft the roles based on the skills of the folks that apply? Or did you kind of identify needs and be like, it'd be great to find someone with these skill sets? Or I don't know, how do you?
Definitely more of the latter. Okay. I think what we learned, because I established a summer internship program there. When I started in 21, we had a great cohort of summer interns, but then they left. And it was like, okay, so now that they're gone, then what? And then I think one of the things that we also learned from this is there was a time where we had the summer interns at the same time as the returns, as people call them, and they kind of shared some spaces. And I think one of the unintended consequences and outcomes from that was the intergenerational knowledge transfer. So you have, quite frankly, a valedictorian who was graduating from our local high school paired in the same space with a retired lawyer who was in the prosecutor's office in the state of Oklahoma, but also was an Army veteran. So the stories that would be exchanged and kind of the natural mentorship that kind of ends up happening from very different backgrounds is something that we didn't anticipate, but definitely a great outcome. That kind of transfer of knowledge is not something that a high schooler would be able to get anywhere else, and vice versa. So he learns about TikTok and Snapchat or whatever, and she's learning about, how to help, better help the community, and about his legal experience and how the way, in some ways, how you can look at things through a different lens. So I think there were some just transfers of knowledge that happened in a way that we didn't anticipate, but you can't quite put a number or value on in terms of an outcome. And I think that's probably one of the best outcomes of this program that we couldn't
have predicted. That's so cool. That's an unintended benefit. That's so
and then
cool.
I think the other piece too is, some of these retirees were looking for some purpose, and one of the things that we saw, the ones that we recruited, were they all had previous public service experience.
Interesting.
When we kind of looked at their resumes in preparation for this, it kind of dawned on me that one of them worked at a naval base as a civilian. The other two were Army. Well, one was an Army veteran, the other one was an Air Force veteran. So looking at kind of the low-hanging fruit, if you have some of those people in your community who have served in some capacity, but probably would be willing to come back 8, 10, 12 hours, maybe 20 hours a week, as long as it doesn't affect their retirement. They'd be willing, I think, to come back and kind of roll up their sleeves and help you out in any way that you can. And that's what we've seen.
I love that. Well, and what a great opportunity for capacity building. Like you said, like being able to add, more skill sets to your team than you'd otherwise be able to, because you've got these.
The morale of having these very seasoned and wisdom folks. Sometimes they come in with cookies and baked goods.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they're the ones going around and talking and
Yeah.
water cooler banter, and it's just fun having them.
Yeah, because part of it for them is the social aspect
Correct.
too.
And
Yeah,
some of it for us, the Gen Zs
yeah,
and millennials, were just, let me get back to a desk.
yeah.
And the coming back from COVID and working remote, where
Yeah.
you're going to have to talk
You
to
have to
George.
talk to someone.
George
Yeah.
is going to talk to you.
Yeah, yeah.
He's always going to make you laugh. So.
Yeah. He's going to talk to you with your headphones in or out. So you can, yeah. That's great. So we're almost out of our time together, but what's next? What are you working on that our listeners should look out for, or that you're excited to be tackling in the next few months?
Yeah, I think one of the smaller conversations we're having locally is kind of the idea of third places and creating those third spaces in our community. So we have, our town is known as Bowling Green.
Yeah.
We have a couple of green spaces, and I think there's ways that we can better leverage those for community good in the future. So excited to see what could come from that. But also just partnerships with the military base and our strategic partners. I think I mentioned we worked on a partnership with them called the Intergovernmental Service Agreement, where we will support the base through their procurement. A lot of their procurements take months on end, if not a year in some cases. So they look to us to kind of help them streamline that process. And it's interesting when you're assisting another government become more agile, but that's essentially what we're doing.
Yeah, if that local government procurement was bad, federal.
Right. And so being able to support them in that way, I think will also help our community, kind of going back to that anchor model, being able to hopefully leverage that relationship and partnership to help our local vendors and businesses as well, so they can help one another.
That's awesome. So cool. Lots of exciting things going on in Bowling Green.
Yeah.
I'm curious from a personal side, like what's it been like with your whole family being there and moving to a small town? Like you've got 2 kids, you said now. So like, what was that transition like? Just out of curiosity.
It's been fun.
Yeah.
It's not too far away from, like I mentioned, where I grew up. So being able to, see my parents. And my parents have
that's a
very
big benefit of moving back home.
Have a very they play a big role in
Yes.
helping in the village that is raising young kids and being manager in this world, but also a part of a great support system. But I think it's definitely rewarding and heartwarming to be able to see your kids, take your kids to events like we have our little music on the green, and my kids are there dancing with other little kids. So
That's
just crawling. In fact, my daughter went from crawling to walking in a few months. Just between the time that we started kind of our music on the green in the spring and the fall. So
that's so cool.
It's interesting to have those experiences. And my mayor went to school with my father. Those sort of small town things that are really great.
That's
and
awesome.
One of my council members was my T-ball coach.
Oh,
so
wow.
There are things that are just you only get in small towns.
Yeah, for sure.
That are great.
That's so cool. All right. If the last question is always the hardest, if you could be the Gov Love DJ and pick the exit music for this episode, what song would you pick?
I think I'm going to cheat and go with one of the songs that my son picked last, which was Prince, Starfish and Coffee.
Awesome.
Which I have to give a nod to one of my mentors, and she knows who she is, for introducing the song to me probably about a decade ago. So I'm leaving with that.
Cool. That's a great pick. We'll get that queued up. And with that, thank you, India, so much for coming and chatting with me here at the 2024 ICMA Conference. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And for our listeners, GovLove is brought to you by ELGL. And the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. You can reach us online at elgl.org/GovLove or on LinkedIn at our GovLove podcast page. You can subscribe to the podcast on your favorite app. And if you're already subscribed, tell a friend or colleague about GovLove. Help us spread the word that GovLove is the go-to place for local government stories. Thanks for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.
Sometimes I wonder if the mates were in her lunchbox.